literally 6 years ago, right about now, we launched what went on to become one of the largest M-Health projects of that time, which was a project that was a collaborative effort between PopTech, Frog Design, the Project Foundation, and iTeach, as well as MTN, which was the second largest telecom on the African continent at that time. And that work was inspired, as many great PopTech projects are, by a speaker. And in the slide, you see a picture of a young woman, that's Zinni Tebete, who spoke at PopTech in 2006 as part of an all HIV positive South African choir. And at the end of their performance, Zinni gave a very moving talk about what was happening in that country around HIV and AIDS, and how really an entire generation was being lost to the epidemic at that time. And a lot of that was being driven by stigma and reluctance to test or be treated. So in a sense, at that time, given the status of treatment for HIV, AIDS, a really useless loss of life. And we worked with Zinni and her partner, Krista Dong, who's a physician at Massachusetts General Hospital. Kind of over the course of the next year, a little plan was hatched. And like many good projects, you have to fail before you succeed. And in 2007, I remember I was sitting kind of midway back in the audience, lower floor here, next to Paul Pollack, who many of you probably know, and he's kind of the granddaddy of social innovation and an expert on impact and scale. And this very funky project gets presented, and it literally falls flat on its face publicly in this room. And Paul says to me in a rather loud voice, what kind of bullshit is that? And I was like thinking, if I could have a trapdoor and fall through that would be a good thing right then. But up in the balcony was Robert Fabricant, and his general perch is kind of up by the door. Over the years, I always know where to find Robert, except when he's sitting on the stage. And so Robert, welcome. And it's wonderful to have you back on the stage 6 years later. And Robert is kind of listening to this, and his wheels are rolling. And another speaker was Katrin Verklas, who was really heading the charge on this notion that you could use mobile technology to solve a lot of problems, but particularly health issues in the developing world. So literally the Monday after PopTech, like 48 hours from right now, Robert, being Robert, had orchestrated a meeting in New York at Frog Design, which involved Zinni, Krista, Andrew, myself, Corinne, and a number of other people. And that hatched this plot to leverage mobile technology. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Robert, and then I'm going to ask, Doreen to talk about the leap of faith she really made with us on this.
Thanks, Leetha. And I feel like this project may have a running record for being on stage about as often as any project in the history of PopTech. So for a lot of you, it's a story you've heard a bit about. But I think that's in part because it did have a pretty remarkable effect on some significant organizations we can talk about later. However, that moment, for me, for most people, that moment at Frog after the event was a moment of panic and fear. I think for us, it was quite the opposite. How many designers, design professionals are in the room? There are plenty, I know, who are still here. And the reality is, having a client come back to you a few weeks after you're going to kick off a project to tell you that the brief has completely changed is pretty much par for the course. It's not really outside. In fact, that's often the best moment. It's the moment when you realize that there are incredible opportunities to rethink and to adapt and iterate, that the assumptions, particularly in an area like public health where assumptions are held so deeply, where people are so committed to the problems and the issues they're trying to solve, you don't often get those moments where everything's back up for grabs, particularly with some of the individuals in the room. So it was really, for us, I think, a very natural moment to feel like we knew that we could start to add some real value to the project. We didn't know where to take it, but it was definitely really just the beginning of the design process. And so, I think that at that moment, I knew I had the backing of Doreen because I knew that she had faith that we could sort of take that process forward, and she knew I'd be up a lot of sleepless nights on the behalf of Frog to make sure that something really remarkable came out of it. So yeah, I certainly must say there was some surprise on her face when I told her we were going to be working with HIV in South Africa and using mobile technology. It was, I'm sure, a bit of a head scratcher.
Well, I think what was interesting was that's not what you told me. So what you told me was, we're going to do, it's really a software program, and we're going to do some software, and then you went to South Africa. And that's the moment where you came back, and it was a phone call, but it was, I could just hear it in your voice. It was big, and it was unstoppable. And getting back to what I said before is understanding what drives people. Could you imagine if I had said no? Where would, you know, like that would have sent this creative organization, and Robert, by the way, was a leader in this creative organization, very, very well respected, and so that would have sent it into you can't, like those are the decisions you make. It's like, let's go for the ride. I think it's going to be a good one, because I always have faith in my people, but that was the reason. But yeah, it was a little different than that.
Well, so, you know, Robert may have bent the truth a wee bit with Doreen at the beginning, but what went on to happen is really remarkable. So on October 1st of 2008, we launched Project Masiluleke, the first phase, which was to send these text messages out. And they went out to a million messages a day went out. Over the course of this stage of the project, we probably sent over 1 billion messages. And those messages, while we didn't do a randomized controlled clinical trial, we have really strong anecdotal evidence that these messages actually provided a conduit for people to get HIV information in a sort of a secret way, a way where they didn't have to go get a flyer or be seen at a clinic. And the call volume to the National AIDS Hotline, which was the conduit that you did the Please Call Me with, went up 300%, 300 to 400%. During this project, and once in a while we would turn it off to see what happened, and it'd go right back down to baseline. So if you think about that, you know, when you're driving that kind of increase in call volume, even if only half of those callers took action, that's a huge impact in terms of access to care, treatment, and testing. And the project went on to really transform I think the way people used mobile technology for healthcare. It was a kind of a cutting edge project in its time. It won UN Foundation awards, won awards in South Africa. And I think it really transformed not only some of the way Frog Design was able to look at and add to their portfolio this whole conduit of mHealth, but the Project Foundation that worked with us. For MTN, they got deeply involved, and they in fact used our same platform that we developed to run an anti-malaria campaign during the World Cup in South Africa a number of years ago. And Robert, do you want to talk about the fact that this is still going? And
yeah, so the other thing I didn't tell you is that this would be possibly the longest running project in Frog's history. So it's been running for about 6 or 7 years. And I think there were some moments, like I described earlier, where I felt very much like within our comfort zone as a partner to know how to handle the uncertainty of that situation. But there were a couple of things that really fell outside our comfort zone. And one was the level of kind of continued commitment that it took to get past not just some of the early success and interest, but particularly to drive sustained incremental value. And not only has it been a 6-year relationship for Frog and a number of the partners, something I'm still involved with deeply. It also involved embedding design, moving past a model where we could support this from New York, and we had a designer who started working on the project who then went to live with the team at iTeach for several years, is still there for 3 years. And a big part of that was figuring out, well, what do you do with a system in which you can broaden access to HIV information? And it started focusing on an idea that Krista in particular was quite passionate about around self-testing. and figuring out a way to turn medical technology, diagnostics, things that are not developed for general purpose use, that are not developed with the sort of empathy that Doreen was talking about, and turn them into something that is available and accessible. And so this is just an example of the kind of rigor that went into the iteration of this particular concept. 4 years of small incremental design work. That's really truly how stuff gets done. Not the big kind of flashy moments on stage, but this is a small sample, having been in KZN and done some of these iterations over the course of 3 years, incrementally taking a process that was very unfamiliar to people and getting it to the point now with some recent trials that and pilots that the team in South Africa has been running, getting this to the point where it's close to 100% in terms of people's ability to take and measure their own exposure to HIV and understand those results. So that's been an unbelievable process, and I think is reflecting some of the ways that both Frog and other organizations are approaching design for impact in different ways. And today, the Frog team is working with 6 mobile operators as an example to help embed designers in their, within their organizations to look at innovations in mobile agriculture services funded by GSMA. So there's a big sea change there. Prekelt, who was a partner that's been mentioned a few times, their technology, which was bootstrapped a bit on Project M, is now core to the infrastructure of UNICEF, of Wikimedia, of a service called Mama, a recent rollout in September of something called Mom Connect, which is a national registration for pregnant mothers and children in South Africa. That's part of the national health infrastructure there. So lots of amazing kind of returns that came from an early kind of sort of failure in how that bound a team together, you know, instead of, I mean, at that moment, you know whether things are going to fall apart or stay together, and it really bound that group together, and it was an amazing collection of people that you kind of only find here in Camden, Maine for some bizarre reason.
Well, that's true, and I think this project really epitomizes the mission side of PopTech and the power of this room, because this project really grew out of this room. That was where it started, and several people got involved a little bit more peripherally, but it talks about what it means to have a community, and particularly one that can take action. So thank you for that, and thank you both for taking that leap of faith with us many years ago.
Easy to do.
Thank you.